Bryan Adams, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thanks for having me on, John. Excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, it is a pleasure to be with you. I'm super excited to have a nice conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about what you have framed as the Great Epiphany. Really, all this discussion around the Great Resignation. There's been tons of conversation around that. We're going to frame it slightly differently, talk about the Great Epiphany, and talk about what that has taught us about employer branding and how to be more effective in the future of work. As we get started, I wanted to share Bryan's bio with everybody. Bryan Adams is the CEO and founder of PH Creative, a global employer branding agency. He is a prominent employer brand thought leader and a two-time best-selling author, podcaster, and speaker. PH Creative has built world-class employer brands and talent engagement strategies for companies like Apple, Entain, and American Airlines. And really, I could go on and on and on, Bryan, but I'll leave that to you to flesh it out and share any other details about your background before we launch on into the conversation.
Well, I think you nailed it, John. I've been doing this just coming up to 18 years now. We're a specialist employer brand agency, and it's basically there's two sides of the same coin from a consumer branding and employer brand perspective, and we just love what we do. And our vision is everybody loves their job. So we exist to help companies better articulate who they are so people can make better informed career decisions.
Yeah, I love it. And it's super important right now amidst this super tight labor market. We already had a skills gap. We already had a labor shortage in many industries and many occupational areas. That's only been exacerbated by the current context and the impacts of COVID and how that's impacted the labor market. So more than ever, we need to have a strong employer brand, and we need to better understand how to convey ourselves effectively out to the talent market so that we can get people to apply. And then once we get them, hopefully we can, retain them and keep them on board. So with that in mind, why don't you start by framing out for us why you call it the Great Epiphany and why you shy away from the idea of the Great Resignation generally?
So really simple, John. The resignation bit is the action right at the end, and it's the result of something, not the motivator or driver. And quite frequently what we try and do is reframe things from the empathetic perspective of the person, not the company, not the business, not the organization. Of course, organizations are seeing people resign, but I think it's important for us to lean into why. And in this case, people have been doing a lot of soul searching. Their life has changed. They value things differently now. And, people are waking up all over the world with an epiphany of, hey, I need to do things differently. Whether it's really life-changing bad news or whether they've seen something in their lives that they're not happy with or comfortable with, or whether they've just discovered or realized something because of the circumstances or whatever's happened in their life. And so really the Great Epiphany is a reminder of what's happening in somebody's life at scale and what's the cause of people moving jobs, quitting, retiring early, and all of this change. And I think whenever we start from the empathetic view of what's really happening, that's when we can start to understand and build and strategize in a more human way. And in employer brand, that typically is served as well.
Yeah, I really like that. And I completely agree that we need to really understand where people are coming from. It's so interesting as I have conversations with executives and leaders. There are many who just basically lament how they frame as entitled younger workers who aren't willing to come back to the office, and they're just frustrated by that. And I mean, whatever you want to make of that, or whatever you want to make of generational differences or work life or work integration preference differences or whatever, the reality is it's kind of silly, wasted energy to complain about why people don't want to come work for you. You have a choice. You either adapt and make your organization, a place that people want to work and an environment where they feel supported and whatnot, or you don't, and people will vote with their feet, and people are voting with their feet right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, essentially branding is about differentiation and relevance. And there is an opportunity to embrace change and accelerate your relevance and reach in a marketplace. So you can either look at this as a gift or you can take the attitude that, you know, that you've just described and instantly become irrelevant. And, you know, that's a choice. I see it as a gift, others don't.
Yeah. Instant irrelevance. I really like that. And I think many have really put themselves in that position, and not just the current state of affairs with the Great Resignation or the Great Epiphany, dealing with the tight labor market, but also just as the pandemic started to unfold, we really saw a sifting of leadership, I think, and organizations and how they responded to the pandemic. And you saw many who took a really people-centered, empathic approach to how they're going to deal with their people. And then you saw others who were super resistant to providing more flexibility and support for their people. And again, that bears out. And now, you know, maybe at the time people were fearful for losing their jobs and what the economy was going to be like. And so people stuck around for a while. But after, you know, people don't have short memories. And after things get settled a little bit and they feel like they have time, as you mentioned, to have this epiphany to really take stock on their life and take stock on their career and the types of jobs they're doing, the type of work they want to do, what's most important to them. As we're taking time to reflect on all of that, then you think about your employer. And if you happen to be working for one of those employers that really wasn't very people-centric during the pandemic, I mean, chances of your people wanting to stick around are going to be pretty darn low. And people won't forget. They won't forget how they were treated. And so that just plays into where we're at today. It makes it even harder for those organizations that were on their back foot at the, you know, during the pandemic. And now we have to go into overdrive to try to correct the ship and have a positive, healthy culture, make sure our people feel supported, and really have the employer brand that's going to allow us to keep our good people, so we don't, you know, see the floodgates open and have people leave in exodus, but also attract new people.
Yeah. So absolutely, you know, and what we've seen over the last 18 months is brand sentiment and value being built on a foundation of vulnerability, authenticity, and compassion. So there has been a real opportunity for brands, you know, for the Davids versus Goliath brands, you know, to lead and show who they are. And that's what we've seen. So even through dark days like Airbnb, the way they released people with empathy and compassion, their brand sentiment went up, their stock price went up quickly as the market started to get back on its feet, and they've been repaid enormously because the world saw how they cared for their people. You know, and we're in a world, a generation now where that counts. It's currency. So, you know, we've learned a big lesson, and to still hear companies complain about their people responding to their current proposition, you know, I just shake my head. It's people, organizations out there still haven't learned that lesson, but they will soon, and it'll be the hard way.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm you know, I consider myself a scholar practitioner. I'm a university professor. I do consulting work and things like this podcast on the side. And overall, I would say, you know, the university is a great place to be. It's a good organization run by good people. So I want to lay that out as an opening kind of disclaimer to what I'm about to say. Now, in terms of pivoting and adapting to this kind of new reality, in part, it's just the nature of higher ed being kind of slow to pivot and adapt. I think that's part of it. But it's been super interesting to see how the university bureaucracy and hierarchy has responded to this pandemic versus, say, certain corporate environments. And right now, we see across the university so many open, unfilled positions. I just barely, I'm a department chair. I just barely filled an admin position that had been open for over 3 months. And I had exactly one candidate for that position. And luckily that person worked out. But, you know, that's the reality. And we, you know, in the past, I think, for example, the university space, you know, we don't always have the highest salaries, but we have good benefits, and it's a meaningful, purposeful, you know, environment. People, you know, feel connected to the mission of the university, and so we attract people that way, right? And I think we really banked on that. We really counted on that to fill our applicant pool so we could select people. And what we're finding is we just can't count on that anymore. We have to do more to be adaptive and to be responsive to the labor market. And we're being a little bit slow at that. And I think that's one of the big reasons why we have lots of vacancies across the university. And then, that has ripple effects, because then people like me, who doesn't have an admin, a full-time admin, I have to basically do my job and a full-time admin job, right? And multiply that across the university, all the people who are picking up the slack. And then you start to see burnout, and you start to see, the frustrations and the resentments and all those sorts of things start to surface, which will just cause more people to leave. So, so all of these are the types of elements we need to keep in mind as we think about the Great Epiphany, and we think about employee, attraction and retention of good people. Let's talk a little bit more specifically now about employer branding. Of course, this is what your company does. What is your approach to employer branding and really, creating that best in class, best organization to work for kind of employer brand?
Yeah, great question. So essentially for me, there's three parts to employer brand strategy. The middle one, the proposition, or the employee value proposition. I wrote a book last year in March of 2020, the worst time to ever launch a book. But that's called Give and Get Employer Branding. And that's about the idea that the proposition is a two-way value exchange. And that means companies have to work harder rather than just promote the strengths, benefits, and opportunities of a place to work. You have to answer the fundamental question of, do I have what it takes to thrive as an employee? And is it worth the sacrifice? What is the give and what do I get? So we can make real balanced career decisions. But there's three layers to employer branding, and that is the middle one. The first one is reputation as an employer. And there's still a little bit of a sort of myth that that reputation can be as intangible as we want to be the world's best employer, or we want to be the most attractive. Well, actually, that's not valuable to any organization. So there's three categories of reputation typically. One is culture, which employer brand has traded on since the dawn of time. Like HubSpot and Salesforce trade on the fact that you can bring your whole self to work and it's a great place to be. The second is career catalyst. So is this a place that is a talent accelerant that is going to accelerate my career, and I'm going to get promoted, I'm going to get more money, I'm going to get more authority, and my LinkedIn CV is going to look great, and I'm going to get a job at Google afterwards, and all of that good stuff. And then the third, now that millennials are officially running the world, and people actually care about a lot more than those two things, is this idea of citizenship. And we're seeing this rise to the priority now. So the integrity of your leader, your sustainability, your supply chain, your diversity, philanthropic activities, all becoming super important to people who are making career decisions. And typically organizations fall into one of those categories. So you'll lead. So Patagonia would lead with citizenship, for example, and McKinsey would be a career catalyst. So, and then the final one is talent experience. So it's reputation, proposition, and experience. And the beauty of approaching it from that strategic perspective is, if you know the reputation you're trying to cultivate and you have a very clear proposition, you can then very clearly find where to place your bets from a talent experience perspective to validate and amplify those two layers, because it's very difficult to be world-class right across the spectrum of talent experience, from candidate experience, employee engagement, and alumni, which is also rising in priority. And my prediction is that's the best place to invest across the talent experience right now is alumni, purely because of the Great Epiphany. People are moving around, and your reputation grows, and your brand reach, goes with that. So there's a lot.
So I can we zoom in on that a little bit, because I really like that. I'm assuming you mean alumni as brand ambassadors for the organization that they've left, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
so, there's a variety of reasons why people leave. And when we talk about the Great Epiphany, sometimes we think, well, someone just realizes my job sucks. I don't want to work for this company anymore, this crappy boss. And so they leave. That's not the only reason why people leave organizations. And sometimes people leave great organizations simply because they want to redirect the trajectory of their career, right? And so when you have people who otherwise have had a great experience at your company, but they choose to go somewhere else, they're the very best at being brand ambassadors for you as an employer brand. They will share the good news of your culture, your environment, all of those things. And that's more impactful, in getting people to consider your organization, especially if you're not like a no-name brand organization, more than a lot of other things.
Absolutely. I mean, nostalgia, one of the most powerful human emotions. If people have a successful career and they look back at their time at your organization fondly, and they tell stories of, I owe it all to them. That's where I learned to do this. That's where I pushed myself to do that. That's where that opportunity came about. It's a fantastic way. It's a long-term bet, but it's a fantastic way to build brand reach and sentiment, and also make it okay for people to come back and bring their wealth of experience and so on and so forth, or refer people and recommend. It's a community that is going to grow. Are you going to control or influence the narrative and harness the value, or not? And, you mentioned retention a few times. And I think with the great epiphany or the great resignation, we're also learning that, one, retention isn't something you can control, you can only influence. And two, I personally believe it's overrated. I think we're seeing a lot of opportunity by people transitioning to other organizations. One, it makes us introspectively look at our organization and say, how do we be better? Two, hopefully it'll change our perspective on people leaving and the ability for them to come back, and the ability to support them in their next journey. And also think about it from a diversity perspective. When people leave, gaps are created for people to step into. So career development can be accelerated, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives can be accelerated, and the health and fitness of organizations get better and people have more choice. So I think retention is overrated.
Yeah, those are all very great points. And you said a couple of things that I want to highlight. One, you talked about playing the long game with this. So if we're talking about employer branding generally, I think that tends to be a bit of a long game kind of an approach. But specifically, if we're looking at the alumni piece,
yep.
You also talked about creating an environment where people can return. It amazes me how often I hear or observe people who leave an organization, and all of a sudden they're kind of blacklisted at the organization. That seems so incredibly stupid to me. Someone who has a tremendous amount of experience, likely someone who has built up social and political capital at the organization, and for whatever reason they decide to leave, if a new opportunity arises and they choose to come back, that is a huge benefit to us. And not only, do we get a good person back, but they have left and gotten more experience and more exposure to competitors or to other areas. That's only going to be able to enhance what we're trying to do. So it seems rather silly that we would kind of have this loyalty test and say, well, you chose to leave and therefore you're not loyal to the company and therefore we're not going to hire you back. Man, talk about shooting yourself in the foot. Just a really kind of a stupid approach, yet it's a fairly pervasive approach. One that I think is declining, but it's still, I see it and hear it about it all the time.
Yeah, it's naive, because it's going to happen. And I think you articulated it absolutely right. It seems to be some sort of loyalty test where actually it's just part of life. So if we embrace that and we think empathetically and compassionately about people's career decisions and what's right for them and so on and so forth, and we embrace them into a wider community that's only going to be enriched and grow over time, you will reap the rewards as the organization as that community grows. And then if you look at the likes of McKinsey, they have a high performance culture. It's an up and out mentality. A lot of the people who do 2 years at McKinsey, they'll go on to work at places like Google and Amazon. Now, it's 25 times harder to get a job at Google than it is to be accepted at Harvard. So McKinsey are very smart. They've got a great alumni website. They've got some world-class recruiters. They spend a lot of time on cultivating, bringing in young talent and cultivating that community on the back end. And it fits together beautifully. Now, they are a great example of an employer that has a very strong reputation as a career catalyst, and they reap the rewards consciously, and I've got to tip my hat to them.
Yeah. And something else you said that I want to also highlight, maybe as we get close to wrapping up today, is the DE&I component to everything we're talking about. I think, thankfully, more and more people are becoming better attuned to the diversity, equity, and inclusion and the belonging kind of conversations. And I think more and more people are recognizing the importance of it, and they have desire to make positive movement in that direction. But there is a challenge if you have the old guard who continues to stay in their positions indefinitely, regardless of how much mind shift that occurs. You can't really move the needle very much, because you're not able to bring new people in or give people at lower levels who might, come from diverse populations more opportunity to move up. So that's a really great point. Not to say that we need to just like jettison all of our the experienced people in the organization, but part of it's the just natural attrition that happens. That's a really great opportunity for us to then really walk the walk, not just talk the talk around diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it so many times where we've even gone in and done some consultancy, and it's like, quick, urgently, we need a strategy, we need an audit, we need to know where we are, we need a plan, and that's all put in place. And it's like, great, now we just need to wait for people to die over the next 25 years, the great Epiphany has given us an opportunity again, but it's a mindset thing. Do you look at it as an opportunity? Do you look at it as a threat or a problem? And there's definitely opportunity for organizations to move the needle there, should they wish to, because people are quitting, they're retiring early, they're, changing their lives entirely, they're emigrating, and, there's a lot of change at the moment. And with that comes opportunity. So if organizations can embrace the changing, the time of change, not only will they benefit in the short term, but again, part of the long-term play, organizations need to think about over the next few years. Top interview questions are going to be, how did you deal with the COVID years, or what have you done to accelerate your diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives? And that narrative needs to be strong, because actually there's no excuse for it not to be.
Yeah, very well said. Well, Bryan, it has just been a pleasure. I note the time. I need to let you go here in just a minute. But before we close, I wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you and find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, sure. So if you check out ph-creative.com, you can see more about PH Creative, the agency. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Bryan Adams, like the Canadian singer, with a number 1, I think it is. That takes you straight to my profile there. We're running a sprint course at the moment. So if anyone's interested in strategic employer brand modeling and learning over a 2-week period, it's going incredibly well. We're having lots of fun, and encourage people to come and meet us over there. But apart from that, John, really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for the opportunity. Nice to connect.
Thank you, Bryan. It's a pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Bryan and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. They can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week.